safety briefing. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Vuisile Njingila, and I'll be taking you through the evacuation procedure from this room. In an event of an emergency, an alarm will sound, which will be followed by an announcement from our PA system. And once we hear that message, please let's try not to panic, gather our belongings, and leave the room as safely as possible. And if there are any people that are living with a disability, please let's assist them out of the room safely. From this room, there are 4 exits that we can use. There's 2 on my left here, and there's 2 on my right. If you're using this side of the room, you go straight out the door, down the staircases, to the security checkpoint, to assembly point number 2, that will be by the pool area. And if you're using this side of the room, you go straight down the passage, through the glass door, you will turn right, down the staircases, to the security checkpoint, to assembly point number 2. Alternatively, should the staircases be blocked by any chance, by the glass door, you'll proceed straight as if you go into the retail area, and the second glass door there, you will turn right to security checkpoint and to assembly point number 1, that will be by the parking area. An attendance register will be used to make sure that we account for everyone. Please make sure that you sign it and you use your cell phone number there, not your landline number, in case we need to contact anyone during the emergency. And once the building is declared safe, we will be notified by our safety personnel to come back into the building. If we need restrooms, outside the door here on my left, the first one will be for the ladies and the second one will be for the gentlemen. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vuisile. That's Vuisile Njingila, ladies and gentlemen. Colleagues, we know it's, for most of us, it is indeed the last day of work before the holiday season kicks in. So we will try be as brief as possible. We have on the line Pravin Gordon, who is going to make an announcement. That is the Minister of Public Enterprises. Are you there, Mr. Gordon?
Yes, I am.
Thank you. Colleagues, it might not be possible to see his face. We've just had some connection issues, but my colleague indicates that he is available. There you go. Over to you, Minister. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Sekunati, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. And thank you for this opportunity to briefly say a few things. The first of which is to congratulate Eskom on what you're going to hear from the senior management in a short while. I don't want to reveal any secrets that they're going to offer you, so I won't say more than that. But they have done extremely well in the difficult circumstances they found themselves. There are 5 points I just want to address, and then I will leave this platform. The first is, as you know, in June this year, 2021, the President announced the amendment to the Electricity Regulation Act to increase the NERSA licensing threshold for embedded generation projects from 1 megawatt to 100 megawatts, which has created a great deal of interest and excitement in the country in terms of investment in this particular opportunity that has been created by government and our sister department. Clearly what follows is that a number of government departments and entities have to do their bit in order to facilitate the actual implementation of projects that are now gathering in the pipeline, either amongst financial institutions or in private sector companies and elsewhere in the state as well. So a crucial issue that then emerges is that of grid access, that is access to the transmission system, which could act as a constraint if there isn't a fast enough way of addressing that. So there are two issues that arise from this. The first is that Eskom is clearly required to and is beginning to expand its transmission grid, particularly in the Northern and Eastern Cape, on an urgent basis. But given the extent of the expansion that's required, this is clearly going to take a bit of time. But the important thing is that there's a great deal of awareness that the grid needs to be available and the location of these projects need to be such that that kind of grid access is made easy. But secondly, and importantly, Eskom itself owns a fair amount of land, particularly in Mpumalanga. So at this stage, Eskom owns some 36,000 hectares of land in Mpumalanga. And there are large portions of this 36,000 hectares that is not currently being utilized by Eskom. The intention is to make this portions of the 36,000 hectares available for investors in the 100 megawatt opportunity that has been provided by the state on Eskom land, and after arrangements have been reached with Eskom itself. The advantage of this is that these investments will have more ready access to transmission lines and the grid that is already in place. Secondly, these are going to be projects that will be funded by the private sector itself in whatever combination, and no state guarantees will accompany these projects, which means that there's no burden on the fiscus itself. And there are a number of other provisions that are in preparation, which will ensure that Eskom itself is a beneficiary rather than a bearer of costs of this important project. So early in the new year, there'll be further details as to which portions of land will be available, what are the processes to be actually followed, and we hope that by February next year, there'll be a lot more clarity, but also a fair amount of indication from interested investors in this particular opportunity that has been created by Eskom in respect of land that is under their control. Both in that respect and in the earlier regard, an important milestone that Eskom needs to meet is that of having an appropriate wheeling tariff with a greater deal of certainty in place that will be charged to those entities that are generating power and wish to use the transmission grid of Eskom itself. There is going to be a fast process by which these important regulatory areas are going to be clarified early in the new year. And Eskom itself will ensure that there is an expeditious way of obtaining approvals and grid connections and all the necessary requirements that are going to have to be met by the private sector as they become participants in this process as well. An important facilitating factor is that areas like eMalahleni have a particular designation in terms of the Department of Environment, which would allow for expedited EIA processes to actually take place, which will also speed up investment on Eskom land as well. Two other final matters. The fourth is the question of having been to COP26, having made very important advances in terms of the just energy transition process within the Eskom power stations themselves, and where Komati Power Station, one of the oldest power stations that we have in Eskom, being ready for decommissioning. Early in the new year, there will also be a a faster process in place once the appropriate funding mechanisms are in place to ensure that this showpiece that has played such an important part in gaining credibility for South Africa's nationally declared contribution at COP26, but also the formulation of the just energy transition plans that Eskom has been responsible for begins to take some concrete meaning and expression on the ground itself. So we look forward in the next 2 or 3 months of next year for the ideas to begin to find expression more concretely amongst the communities, the workers, and the kind of training facilities and other infrastructure that needs to be put in place. Finally, there's been some concern about the question of toxic emissions in some of the power stations or from some of the power stations. Minister Creasy and my office will be issuing a statement shortly to clarify the exact status of the interactions between Eskom and the Department of Environment and the safety officers concerned. And the only thing I want to say in this regard at this point in time is that there is no need for any serious concerns because there's no closure of 16,000 megawatts tomorrow morning or soon thereafter, and that between Minister Creasy's department and ourselves, we will find a constructive way forward, but we will issue a statement later in the afternoon in this particular regard. So to remind you, firstly, it's access to Eskom-owned land for those who wish to invest in and take the advantage of the opportunity for the 100 megawatt investment projects. Secondly, the importance of grid access in Mpumalanga. Thirdly, the building of further transmission lines in the Eastern Cape and Northern Cape, which are going to be important contributors for future investments there as well. And the kind of advantages that South Africa as a whole will have once we have a very clear regulatory framework from Eskom itself in relation to, on the one hand, the approvals for grid connection, but also the charges that will accompany those connections as well. So, Sekanati, thank you very much for this opportunity to send out these messages, and I then leave my Eskom colleagues to tell you some good news. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Cotton. Will you still be on for questions after the presentation, please?
No, I think my announcements are clear enough, so I'll hang around as much as I can, if I can be helpful.
I've got 2 reporters in front of me. They are already confirming they have 6 questions for you. Thank you, sir. Andre, please come give us the presentation. Thank you.
Right, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us this afternoon as we share with you our results for the first half of the financial year. I'm joined today by our Chief Financial Officer, Mr. Caleb Kassim. He will take you through the detail of the numbers. I will give you some highlights and then also share with you updates on our operations. If we can move on to the next slide, please, the customary disclaimer, and immediately go to the key points. The important part to emphasize on the key points is our net profit after tax of 9.2 billion rand. This is a significant improvement. You see the percentage on the screen there compared to the prior year comparable period. And I'm very pleased to say that our financial results have improved across all key profitability metrics. Our sales volumes are up 8%, which is a strong recovery after the pandemic, and a contribution was made to improve revenues by a 15.06 tariff increase, which we were able to implement after prevailing in a number of high court cases. We were also able to further strengthen the balance sheet. Our gross debt, for that matter, our net interest-bearing debt overall decreased by some 15%. So we continue to bring our debt under control, and we were able to repay our capital to the tune of 24.4 billion. We're very grateful for government support, which played a key role in enabling us to reduce our debt to the tune of some 31.7 billion. Of course, generation did not have a good first half. We had to implement, sorry, can we just go back to the previous slide? Of course, generation didn't have a good first 6 months. We had to implement load shedding to the tune of 427 gigawatt hours. This is 5% less than in the comparable period the prior year, but still not something that we are pleased with, and something that is enjoying a lot of attention of our Chief Operating Officer, Jan Oberholzer, and the Managing Director of our Generation Division, Philip Dukashe. We had a very good performance from transmission and distribution, and then also were able to make good progress on our new build program. More on that in subsequent slides. From an environmental perspective, also improved performance, and then we were able to continue to reduce our headcount in a steady and responsible manner using natural attrition and voluntary severance packages as our major levers, so no forced retrenchments in accordance with the instructions of our shareholder. Legal separation, very important strategic imperative for the electricity supply industry in South Africa to enable greater confidence from private investors to invest particularly in generation. So that's a very important strategic enabler. We're making good progress on that, and we will give you more detail on that later on. We are forecasting a net loss of 9.1 billion for the end of the financial year. Caleb will unpack the reasons for that. But suffice it to say that we are going to be working very hard as a management team to address this forecast loss and see in what ways we can mitigate it and bring that number down to something that is more acceptable. Next slide. From a generation performance perspective, you can see there that our plant availability was at a very poor 65.27%, down from prior year. So more work needs to be done there. Part of the reason why this performance has declined is due to the increased maintenance that we have done. As a consequence, even though in gigawatt hours we implemented load shedding 5% less than in the prior year, in number of days during which we had to implement load shedding, it was 21 days instead of 19 days. I may just also add here and stress that one of our key cost drivers is coal cost, and we were able to contain our coal cost in rands per tonne to a 0.7% reduction compared to the prior year. If you adjust for inflation, that equates to about a 5% reduction in our rand cost per tonne for coal. And this breaks a trend over a number of years of double-digit increases in our cost of coal. So again, a very pleasing intervention that we were able to deliver on. Unfortunately, our primary energy cost went up, not only because we consumed more coal due to higher demand, but also because we used our open cycle gas turbines much more than we would have liked. This is a key cost driver for us, and improved generation performance will help us to bring that cost down considerably. We are continuing our maintenance program. We are resolute in not compromising on this, and it's a key focus area of the generation team to restore our plant to reliability. Unfortunately, though, we had major incidents at Medupi Unit 4, where we had a hydrogen explosion in our generator at that unit. It's scheduled to return in approximately 18 months' time. And then also we had a transformer fire at Kendall Unit number 1 that is scheduled to return to service on the 21st of December. We had 2 trips at Koeberg. We're not concerned about that. The plant is continuing to operate safely, and we intend to take the first unit out on a 155-day outage to replace steam generators. It's part of the life extension for the next 20 years of that plant, as well as to do a general plant outage. Once Unit 2, that's the first unit that's going out, returns to service, we will then take out Unit 1, and that unit will then follow for a very similar outage. The steam generators, very large pieces of equipment, have already been delivered on site and are safely housed at Koeberg. We reduced our coal inventory. This is in part due to the higher burn, but also due to better working capital management. But we are well within grid code requirements at all of our power stations. From a network perspective, we had only one incident on our transmission line that lasted 0.86 minutes, so we do take these things seriously. We measure it very tightly. But apart from that, both transmission and distribution performed admirably, and we want to thank our colleagues under the leadership of Sekhamotso Skeppers and Monde Bala for their very hard work in maintaining stability across our grid and our network. Medupi 1 achieved commercial operation, so that unit, the entire plant, has now been handed over to the operations, and the contractors are no longer in control of those units, which means that we've achieved the objective that we've set for ourselves. The design defects that have plagued Medupi have been by and large addressed at our boilers. There are still further modifications required at our coal mills, but I must say it's very pleasing to see that the units at Medupi are now consistently performing at design specification, and that has made a major difference to the stability of our system. At Kusile, we have completed these mods at Unit 1. Unit 2 is currently on an outage, and then of course we will, for those units still under construction, implement these changes prior to starting commissioning. Speaking of Kusile, Unit 4 will be synchronized to the grid by January 22. Hopefully we can do it a little bit earlier. The team is working very hard on that. And then we aim for commercial operation, again, handing the unit over from the contractor to Eskom operators by June 22. And that will add another 700 odd megawatts to the grid, which is a very helpful addition to our generation capacity. We are required to install a flue gas desulfurization unit at Medupi. We have reached agreement with the World Bank to extend this timeline to June 2027, and we are engaged in pursuing this project. It is a large project. It will cost between 30 and 40 billion rand is the current capital cost estimate, but we are committed to meeting our environmental as well as our lender requirements in this regard. Lastly, another highlight, and this will come as a relief to residents of towns in eastern Mpumalanga that have had to bear the brunt of significantly increased truck traffic on the roads. We have repaired the coal tippler unit at Majuba. That has now been completed, and the first train was successfully offloaded early in October of 2021. We are working very closely with Transnet Freight Rail to increase the number of trains and further reduce the number of trucks on our roads in order to minimize damage to our road infrastructure and also to improve road safety and bring down the cost of coal transport. Next slide, please. From a triple bottom line perspective, we've seen this improvement in our particulate emissions, so that is very, very good. But some of our plants still reported poor performance, and that is something that needs to be addressed going forward due to poor coal quality. So increasingly, we are focusing under the leadership of Sandile Siyaya on improving our coal quality, holding our coal suppliers to account, making sure that Eskom gets what Eskom pays for in terms of our coal. So strong focus area to also make sure that there's no tampering with our coal in transit. And then internal plant performance, dust handling plants, SO3 plants, those need to receive more attention. We are still engaged in a criminal trial on emission contraventions at Kendal. That trial is set to continue in January 22. Our water consumption is not something that I'm pleased about. We know South Africa is a water-stressed country, and paying more attention to how efficiently we use our water resources is clearly a focus area. And as you can see there, many of our environmental contraventions are in fact related to water. From a people perspective, I referenced the fact that we were able to continue reducing our headcount. Our safety performance is good. However, it is appropriate at this moment to pause and reflect on the fact that 3 employees and 2 contractors lost their lives while in the service of Eskom, which of course is entirely unacceptable, and our heartfelt sympathy goes out to the families of the deceased. We are maintaining safety as our number 1 priority in Eskom, and we will not compromise on that. We are continuing to improve our racial and gender equity metrics. This is, of course, made even more difficult by the fact that we have a recruitment moratorium. So the fact that we are able to continuously improve on this score really speaks volumes for the commitment that we have as a management team to driving transformation at our professional and management level. However, we are less successful on a disability score, and this will be a key focus area going forward so that we can reflect the demographics of our society across all categories. We're continuing to provide electrification connections and then also drive preferential procurement spend, even as we focus on the elimination of non-value adding intermediaries from our supply chain. Next slide, please. Finally, in conclusion, let me touch on this key strategic imperative of legal separation. The target that we've got is to focus on the transmission business and set that up as an independent transmission system and market operator. We have achieved functional separation. We've got divisional boards in place. We've got financial statements. We've registered a new legal entity, the National Transmission Company South Africa. So that is in place. We have directors pro tem while we're in the process of compiling a short list of potential directors, which we will be submitting to the DPE for its final approval. We have completed a very extensive legal due diligence, more than 600 pages of legal due diligence work that was performed. And we have now put in place measures to start trading so that we can have the first electricity trading platform in place as soon as possible. And that is a very important sign of the commitment that we as Eskom have of steadily moving away from the monopoly position that we've occupied for close on 99 years now. We have in place an asset transfer agreement. This agreement is ready to be signed pending formal approval from the DPE as well as from National Treasury in terms of the Public Finance Management Act. Yesterday we received approval from DPE, so thank you very much to the Minister for signing that. And National Treasury, we believe, is in the pipeline. So as soon as we get those approvals, we can then sign the agreement, and then we will have a legally binding agreement to transfer assets from Eskom Holdings SOC into this wholly owned subsidiary. I may just say that this is one of the most complex corporate restructuring exercises that our advisors have worked on, and they're very highly skilled and experienced. And the fact that we were able to deliver to this point within the very aggressive timeline set in the DPE roadmap really speaks volumes for the very capable team led by Pindi Mabena, and I want to recognize her for the key driving role that she's played in enabling us to get to this point. So we expect to have this transmission company up and running during the 2022 calendar year. Hopefully we can pull that forward. But we still require a transmission license, first of all, to be cancelled. The transmission license currently is in the hands of Eskom Holdings SOC, so that needs to be cancelled, and then a new license needs to be issued. And we are in discussions with both the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy as well as NERSA to put in our application for this new license. We are engaging with our lenders at 5 o'clock this afternoon to ensure that they are kept fully in the loop and on board with this. We have appointed a financial advisor as well as a legal advisor to assist us in this process, and we really appreciate the continued support from our lenders as we embark on this very significant restructuring process. There are certain amendments to the Electricity Regulation Act that need to be put in place. This is not a prerequisite for the legal separation, but it will facilitate the operation of a more liberalized market dispensation going forward. So therefore it is quite important that these amendments also get put through. So by and large, from an Eskom perspective, we have done everything that was at our disposal to meet the timeline of the 31st of December 2021 to achieve legal separation. And we really believe that this is going to be pivotal in addressing the generation capacity shortfall. So with that, I'm going to pause, and I'm going to allow my colleague Caleb Kassim to take you through the numbers in greater detail. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen and the media. Thanks for the opportunity. Okay, I think Andre said a lot, and effectively following on what Andre has said, this is the first time since I'm presenting that all the financial indicators, one, are moving in the right direction and are all green. However, this is definitely, although positive, it's not at the desired levels of where we want to be as Eskom to ensure financial sustainability, but I think it's a great step in the right direction. Obviously, as we all know, historically Eskom performs much better in the first 6 months and in the second 6 months. One, with the difference in tariffs when you compare winter tariffs to summer tariffs. Secondly, lower volumes and more maintenance. We then, from an Eskom perspective, financially perform much worse in the second half of the year compared to the first 6 months. And that is reflected in our projections as indicated, that loss of 9 billion by year end. But if you look at it, I think what is also important, looking at this slide here and looking at the last 5 years, this is the first time that we're reporting a profit as at the 6 months results. The last time this was achieved was in 2017. And even if you look at your gearing debt equity ratio, off the peak of September 2019, that debt equity and gearing is improving to levels that are getting towards our target for financial sustainability. Just to touch on a few key indicators, you see that the EBITDA margin compared to last year is up from 26% to 33.2%. And then in terms of your cash interest cover ratio, where you want that to be above 2, we're sitting at 2.2 compared to 1 last year. And in terms of your debt service cover, which includes your capital repayments, ideally you want that to be a minimum of 1. We were close to that for the 6 months at just 0.88, double that of the previous 6-month window. And then importantly, you see that your debt equity, including long-term provisions, at 1.59 compared to 2.52 for the previous year for 6 months ended September 2020, ultimately culminating in your gearing dropping from 72 to 61%. So that is positive, and then you'll see what the outlook is going forward. I think just to highlight from the restatement of these September 2020 numbers, you will recall that when we presented our year-end results, the one big change that we made was accounting for the pension fund from a defined contribution to a defined benefit. That then comes through in that restatement. I think also importantly, you'll see that the interim results that is uploaded, it hasn't been reviewed, as we were only able to appoint our auditors at the beginning of November. So this is based on management results. Unpacking the income statement in a bit more detail, I won't touch on the revenue. Andres explained that. But the growth in primary energy substantially on the back of higher diesel that has come through. Just for the year-on-year movement, we've incurred another 2 billion rand worth of diesel costs for September 21 compared to the previous year. And then over and above the coal purchase costs that Andre has spoken about, to run a coal power station, it's not just the rand per ton of coal that you pay for. There's coal handling costs, there's fuel oil, etc. All those costs have to come into account, and that has escalated year on year, contributing to the 14% escalation in primary energy costs. And you will see in a later slide how we do unpack that, including a growth in IPP costs based on volume, as well as some costs coming through. From an operating cost perspective, our employee benefits is relatively flat year on year. The 16.4 billion growing to 16.8 billion in September 21. And under the O&M, what we do find that, number one, there's much more repairs and maintenance that has occurred in this first 6 months compared to the previous year. We will unpack that, in particular, some more maintenance in generation and distribution. And then following the 2 incidents that was highlighted, we had to then write off 900 million for Medupi Unit 4, as well as 86 million for Kendall Unit 1, ultimately culminating in that bottom line profit of 9.2 billion rand. And then you also find that your depreciation is increasing as more and more units are commissioned. We would then amortize those units. That comes through in your depreciation. But together with that, you will see later in the presentation, we then recognize more of previously pre-commissioning revenue and costs that flowed through, as well as more finance costs that will now be expensed compared to previous years being capitalized. If I move on. So in terms of your sales and revenue, it's very clear that all the sectors have improved except for your residential sector, slightly down 3% compared to year on year. And the big increases coming in the industrial sector and the mining sector on the back of better commodity prices that we've seen over the last year. I think importantly, the other item I'd like to highlight on this slide, you can see we still have our challenge from recognizing the revenue from, in particular, municipalities, and that trend in arrear debt is still increasing. So 5.5 billion rand worth of revenue we were unable to recognize as at September 21, and you can see that trend has deteriorated from the 4.6 billion of the previous year. And like I mentioned, on the positive side, as more and more units are brought into commercial operations, we then capitalize less of that revenue, within that drop from the previous year of almost 1 billion rand coming through in terms of that revenue line. Unpacking our primary energy, so Andre's spoken about the 0.7% reduction in coal purchase cost. That does come through. However, the amount that you are seeing here is firstly total coal costs, which includes those other components that I've mentioned. And the other difference is this is the burn cost that hits your income statement rather than the purchase cost. So overall, we can see the rand per megawatt hour has increased year on year in total by 4%, but this is far lower than the previous historic trends of around 15%. This would not only bode well for this financial year, but that purchase cost reduction of 0.7% will filter into future outlooks in terms of coal costs and coal escalations going forward. I think the other item to touch on is your OCGTs. Other than the higher volumes that were incurred over this period compared to last year, based on the oil prices and that have escalated, we do see then that the OCGT unit rate has gone up 15% for Eskom plants and 13% for the IPP diesel plants, Avon and Dedisa. Renewable costs as an overall rand per megawatt decreasing by 10%. However, we do see that with the increase in production from the IPPs, as more and more bid windows have come on, together with the escalations, we've seen about close to 2 billion increase in IPP costs year on year. Overall, our primary energy rand per megawatt going up 5% compared to the previous September 2020. What are we doing in terms of, firstly, repairs and maintenance? And you can see that compared to September 2020, we've increased that to 8.8 billion as at September 21, with a 31% growth in generation and 20% in distribution. However, we do recognize in particular that generation requires much more in terms of the outage capex and the importance of releasing funds so they can plan adequately and timeously to address those capex requirements in terms of their outage commitments. Yes, based on the liquidity, we need to manage that. And as funding comes through, then from a finance perspective, we do release it. However, it's important that the earlier we can do that, it allows to create a platform for better execution on the generation side. Based on these results, we were able to increase that release for this financial year. Yes, it is a bit late. It should have been earlier. However, we've already released just over 8 billion for the next financial year. It's lower than the 10.7 billion rand that is required, but we believe that based on these financials, we are moving in the right direction to also assist generation to address those issues. And you can see that on the capital expenditure, that escalation of 14.1 billion compared to last year this time of 10.8 billion. One would expect that at the peak of the build program, we would have incurred more capex for the 6 months. And as we come into the end of the build program, that capex then reduces as reflected in that trend analysis. It's also important to ensure that our capital projects are conducted in an efficient manner to extract the necessary savings as well. What we have also done as Eskom is from a cost savings perspective and initiatives, it's not only that we want the results to improve by volume changes and tariffs, we focus on cost savings, including working capital, just to highlight that for the first 6 months, we've achieved 7.8 billion rand worth of our savings target compared to 10 billion rand. We set a target of 20 billion rand for this financial year. Our projections as at the half year reflected a 18.5 billion savings by year end. Obviously, would look to try to close that gap as Andre has indicated. I think importantly, other than looking at your operating costs, working capital, we don't want money tied up there unnecessary, and we're looking to optimize on the inventory side, on your maintenance and your consumable spares to release some of that liquidity back into the business. So over and above the positive drop of 15% in your debt from 463 billion rand to 392 billion, one, you can see that the liquidity position has improved year on year from just under 25 billion in September 2020 to 36 billion rand as at September 21. But important also to highlight with the change in the exchange rate implications, we see that the derivatives that we hold has deteriorated from 36.8 billion to 14.6 billion. I think more importantly, you will see it in the detailed set of financials. This is the first time in a number of years that our current assets actually exceed our current liabilities, again reflecting a positive trend in the right direction. In terms of our debt and what that mix is of the 392 billion rand, as at September, our local debt comprised 60% and foreign 40%. If we then move on to just looking at the finance costs and unpacking that a bit more, the gross finance charges 21.8 billion compared to 23 billion of the previous year. And then obviously you can see the amount that is capitalized, 4 billion compared to 6.8 billion of the previous year as further units are commissioned. Average borrowing cost year on year has remained relatively flat at around 9.85%, and our positive balance generates returns of 3.64% for the year. I think what is also important to highlight, that 21.8 billion rand is our second largest cost item behind coal costs. It's even higher than our employee benefits that was sitting at about just over 16 billion rand, and our capex that we've incurred for the 6 months at 14 billion rand. So as Eskom has always been saying that we need to address that debt stock on the balance sheet to a more acceptable level to create a more sustainable future for Eskom and to remove ourselves from being reliant on the fiscus for continuous support. From a funding perspective, for the financial year, we are looking to raise just under 42 billion for the year. As at September, we've had committed transactions in place of 16.6 billion rand. I think important just to highlight that syndicated loan of 15 billion, we've already secured 10 billion rand of that in October, increasing our funding execution, and we're confident that we will be able to achieve the remainder by March 2022. And next year's funding plan, we are looking at about 24.4 billion rand. We've already got committed facilities in place of 11.5 billion rand. From a government guarantee, what was available at the end of September, 47 billion rand of that. Obviously, 10 billion of that then was subsequently used with the syndicated loan since September. But importantly, you can see, based on our debt profile, the maturities are still significant. 71 billion for this financial year to March 22, and over the next 3 remaining years, those debt service commitments on average are around 60 billion rand per annum, and that's the importance that we need to address from a sustainability perspective. So from a cash flow, without repeating what I've said, the operating surplus of 36 billion absorbed by your interest repayments of 16 billion, your capex of 14 billion plus other expenses that give you your 21 billion. It does leave a gap after we've actually drawn down on the 16 billion rand, on 11 billion by September, and then we repaid the 24 billion. The gap was made up of your government support of 31.7 billion, culminating into our cash balance as at end of September. Your arrear debt, I think firstly on Soweto debt, you can see that has dropped from your March 7.5 billion to 6.9 billion as at end of September. We have written off some in duplum interest in terms of legislative requirements. However, of concern is our arrear municipal debts. That has increased some 16%, 5.6 billion rand since March 2021. Despite a number of interactions and the support and engagements with the political task team, the multidisciplinary revenue committee, we've entered and engaged with 45 municipalities around active partnering model, including all top 20 defaulting municipalities. Only Maluti Upper Fong did not want to agree to this partnering agreement. We're now addressing that through a court process. And of the arrear debts, the top 20 constitute 80% of your municipal arrear debts. In terms of other customers that are owing Eskom, there are 2 customers that owe Eskom in excess of 100 million, which totals 785 million rand. So in terms of the outlook for the rest of this financial year, you can see, as we've indicated, and similarly to the last financial year, we moved from a break even to a 18.9 billion loss. So you can see in these numbers is about a 18 billion rand negative swing in the second half of the year, resulting in your EBITDA margin then dropping from the 6 months 33.2% to 21.6% forecast. Your operating profit then dropping from 29 billion to just about 22 billion. And then your interest cover ratio dropping from 2.2 to 1.5, debt service from 0.88 to 0.69, and then even your debt equity ratio then increases again slightly to 1.8. What is also important, Eskom is able to continue to operate and sign off as a board of directors that we remain a going concern on the back of the commitments of the government support. As per the medium-term budget speech by the minister, 21.9 billion for FY23 and another 21 billion rand for FY22. I think lastly, just to touch on, you would have seen in the media the MYPD5 rejection, Eskom's review and the court supporting that review. NERSA will now has published our application and will then hold public hearings in January to make a decision for the next financial year. I think it's also important to highlight to the audience that there is a part B to that court case that will address the second and the third year as well. So importantly, yes, positive 6 months results, but there still are challenges. We all need to work and address not only the operational requirements, but more importantly, to address the financial sustainability, which from an Eskom perspective means delivering on our own cost base and cost efficiencies to deliver the 20 billion savings, for the tariffs to migrate to, as we've said, cost-reflective levels. We need to address the municipal debt solution. Eskom cannot remain to be a bank to the municipalities. Just for the 6 months, 5 billion rand difference would make a big difference to our bottom line in terms of recognizing that. And last but not least, we need to address the balance sheet and what debt Eskom can sustain into the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Caleb. Thanks, Andre. Colleagues, thank you so much for your attention. I have to tell you that at 4:45, both Andre and Caleb have to leave to attend another call with the investors, bond investors. This is an obligation on their part. To address directly investors on a call, the bond investors. The Minister of Public Enterprises has also had to leave to attend to his other commitments. I can assure you, Heidi, that on January 27, 2022, Eskom will, in this same room, hold a media briefing in which we will expand on that particular announcement as we do on the state of the system briefing. At this very point, I have my colleagues at the back and they will be reading your questions. Andre and Caleb and Monde and Sekhumoto will then leave the room at 4:45 to attend to the call. Thereafter, we will deal with the planned and already agreed interviews. Colleagues, please can you give us the first 4 questions? Thank you.
Okay, the first question is from Jan Vermeulen at My Broadband. He wants to know, Eskom said it expected 4 more arrests linked to the corruption at Tutuga. Have those arrests been made? If so, can you please give details? Second question is, Eskom also said the further warrants of arrests are being prepared concerning other suspects in a fuel oil syndicate. Can we please get an update on that? His third question is, why does Eskom need a 20.5% increase in electricity tariffs. And his last question is, what is the load shedding outlook for the festive season?
Thank you, Swazi. Do you want to take those, Andre?
Right, thank you very much, Jan. The investigations at Tutuka into wide-ranging corruption, fraud and theft are ongoing. Further arrests are expected. These arrests have not yet been made, but we are working very closely together with the South African Police Services to bring those to book who have charges to answer. And this is an ongoing investigation, so I don't want to comment too much about what is being done there. Yes, further warrants of arrests are being prepared, and we can expect further news flow on that as the investigation progresses. Bear in mind that Eskom does not have powers of arrest, so we do rely on our partners in law enforcement to carry out those arrests. And of course, they work under their own guidelines and their own requirements. So in due course, no doubt, more announcements will be made. We are going to be stepping up our surveillance and our scrutiny about on fuel oil deliveries across the board. We have seen a steady uptick in our consumption of fuel oil, and as it goes with fraud, it's a bit like a balloon. If you start squeezing on one end, it starts to bulge at another end, and we suspect that's what's happening in this case. So we are going to be stepping up our controls and our vigilance at all of our power stations. Caleb, can you address the 20.5% increase question, please?
Yeah, thanks, Andre. Jan, or whoever's asked that question, I think firstly, Eskom has applied one in terms of the MYPD methodology and where we would justify our operating costs, all of those elements, your capital expenditure, and what we do believe that based on, as you can see in these financial results, we've definitely improved in terms of better cost management. We believe that application we can defend as Eskom, and that will be conducted through the NERSA process in January, over and above our own operating costs that we'll defend. I think it's important to realize that we have to close the cost of capital element importantly per the regulatory mechanism, and the other contributing factor, as we know, IPPs is allowed, and correctly so, as a pass-through in the mechanism. So whatever those changes, as more and more bid windows come online, that would then be included in the overall application that Eskom has made, and we'll address that through the regulatory process in January. Thanks.
Thank you, colleagues. Do you have another set, please?
Sorry, can I just address the final question?
Oh, yeah.
What's the load shedding outlook
Load
for the
shedding.
festive season? That is a
Go
very
ahead.
pertinent question. Typically, demand for electricity is much lower over the festive season. After the 16th, when the builders' holiday starts, demand drops down as well. In fact, today we were able to put 2 units on cold reserve. What that means is that we have excess generation capacity, which is a very unusual position for Eskom to find itself in, but we're very grateful for that. So it means that we are in good shape for the festive season. Of course, the generation system has the habit of keeping me very humble. So there's always the caveat that due to the poor reliability and predictability of our generation system, there is always a residual risk. But where we are today, the outlook is positive. Thanks, Sikonati.
Thank you, Andre. Do we have the next set, please, colleagues?
The next set of questions is from Nicolette van Sale, ESI Africa. Have the 3 entities considered new business revenue opportunities, and what are we likely to see unfolding? Question number 2, how will the unbundling affect agreements with the Southern African Power Pool to trade electricity, and which entity takes on the different contractual elements?
Thank you. Can you give us 2 more, please, Lerato?
There's Suren Naidu, MoneyWeb. Question number 1, what impact has load shedding had this year? What impact has load shedding this year, arguably the worst ever, had on Eskom and Eskom's latest financials? That is quantity, roughly in terms of lost sales. Question number 2, Lungile Mashele, an independent energy expert, last week made this statement, amongst others, during a webinar, quote, those units in Eskom's coal fleet that do work are being utilized at a rate of more than 90% versus an international benchmark of 70%, and that concerns lenders. We are currently running our coal fleet to the ground. What is Eskom's response to this?
Thank you, Lerato. Colleagues, we do have Philip Dugashe and Jan Oberholzer on the line as well. Do you want to take the first 2 questions, please, Andre?
All right, thanks very much. Just flip up the questions again to the previous page, then I can respond to that, please. Thank you. Nicolette, Eskom's tariffs are regulated, and we can only generate regulated income. There are very limited opportunities for us to generate non-regulated income. Strategically, we do not wish to be in competition with the private sector. We don't want to crowd out the private sector. We want to enable more participation by the private sector in the electricity supply industry. So if there are opportunities, I expect them to be quite modest, and that they will not make any significant difference to our income statement. The second question, how will the unbundling affect agreements with the Southern African Power Pool? These agreements will remain in place. We are engaging with participants in the SAPP to seed their current agreements with Eskom to the transmission company, because the transmission company is going to be the entity that is going to be responsible for international trading. So it will be the National Transmission Company South Africa that will take on this international trading role going forward. If we can move then to Suren's questions. I think, Caleb, can you hazard a guess at the impact of load shedding on our financials?
Yeah, I think the impact in terms of our sales volumes will be in the region of about 0.5% based on the load shedding that has been incurred thus far.
Right, thanks, Caleb. And then if I can ask Philip Dugashe, please, to respond to Lungile's question, the energy expert.
So the question is around EUF, how hard we are running our units in excess of 90% on the coal side. That question is very true, and this is an area obviously that we are concerned about. You'll recall that we got to this stage where our plants need intensive maintenance because we are driving them hard. Now, because of unreliability that we still have, we're still running those plants that are available hard. But what that means is we have to increase the amount of maintenance that we are doing. So there is a big drive to make sure that our maintenance is equivalent to the amount of hard driving that we have on the units. So it can be managed, but we really need to up our maintenance substantially, and I think the CFO did touch on that. Thanks.
Thank you, Philip. Ladies and gentlemen, that is Philip Dugashe. He is the Generation Group Executive. Please give us the next 4 questions.
We have one from Teresa Smith at ESI Africa. She wants to know what debt does the new generation company inherit from Eskom Holdings, and what are the plans to address it? Her second question is, how does the unbundling affect agreements around electricity trading with the Southern Africa Power Pool? And Dumba Katambua from AFD wants to know, please add detail related to the 5 fatalities, in which part of the business did these fatalities occur? What safeguards have been put in place to prevent a reoccurrence of these?
Thank you, Susan. Let's hold it right there. I guess that question refers to transmission, not the generation company. And the question on the power pool has just been answered. Caleb, can you talk about debt parceling out to transmission, please?
To Teresa's question, she speaks here specifically on the new generation company. I think obviously you would expect that the amount of debt that will go to generation, our principle is based on where the debt was raised, in particular generation on the new build projects. The most significant portion of the debt would then follow generation, and then the remaining would go to transmission and distribution. So you would expect that the largest portion of that 392 billion rand to go to generation. Obviously, we'll have to engage, as indicated, with the lenders, make sure we all align before we communicate any further details on that. Thank you.
Thanks, Caleb. Do you have any detail on the fatalities?
Yes,
Yes?
I do. Fatalities are always very regrettable, and it's something that we take very seriously, and we're very concerned about any fatality. Any incident is by definition preventable if adequate health and safety measures have been observed. So we are really disturbed by any fatality that does occur. The fatalities that did occur, 2 contractors in generation, both were incidents where the contractors were caught between or under a heavy object, which caused the fatality. There was 1 vehicle accident and 1 electrical contact in distribution, and then there was a vehicle accident in our human resources department, the Eskom Academy of Leadership. So those were the 5 highly regrettable fatalities that occurred. Obviously, many of our employees travel long distances over roads, frequently after hours, in the dark, and that is when road safety becomes a significant issue for us. So again, they are on duty, and as such, they are our responsibility. So road safety is also an important concern for us. Thank you, Sekunati.
Thanks, Andre. Lerato, please give me another batch.
Next set of questions, we have a question from J. Jones Gondo, Nedbank. With higher tariffs awards, does Eskom need less shareholder injection over the medium run that was slated in the national budget? Terence Kramer, Kramer Media. What is the main driver of the fall in the projected FY22 loss relative to FY21? Any update on the debt solution and what the options could be? Question number 2, could Eskom please explain the statement from the DPE and DFFE? The appeal administrator has granted Eskom approval to file their late appeal, which they have now submitted. Members of the public and stakeholders are requested not to panic as there's no imminent power outages. Another set.
No, I think let's just get the questions on the screen in front of us rather than on behind us. All right. I think, Caleb?
So in terms of our application and even the current corporate plan, based on what we applied for, we would still need that government support that I've indicated of the 21 billion effectively over the next 2 financial years. So that is still required, and that's basically on the back of that significant 60 billion run rate over the next 3 years in terms of debt service commitments. I think maybe just to add to that questions, we do believe that once the tariff gets at a level where you can recover not only your efficient operating costs, but the full cost of capital, then that reliance of government support should then reduce and effectively go away. Over and above the tariff, we address the municipal solution as well. Thanks.
Caleb, please answer the one as well on the drivers behind the reduction in the losses next year.
So effectively, your loss, obviously 15% tariff increase plus that 8% volume growth has come through in the numbers, together with, as I mentioned, Eskom's cost control focus of extracting 20 billion target out of our cost base. Those 2 factors contribute significantly to the reduction in the loss from your 18.9 billion to your forecasted 9 billion loss. Thanks.
Andre, thank you, Caleb.
Right, if I can respond to the DPE and DFFE statement. The appeal suspends the decision. So until the appeal is heard and considered, the decision has been suspended from an administrative law perspective. So we then await this appeals process, which we have now initiated. If I've got it right, we got our appeal document in today as per the deadline, and this will now be considered by DFFE, I'm sure, and they will pay attention and give consideration to all of the elements, including the potential impact of the decision on the supply of electricity, and I've got every confidence that this process will be a fair, balanced and objective one.
Andre, in plainer English, no power stations will be closed right now, I see.
No.
Am I correct?
That's correct.
Until the DFFE has made a ruling on the appeal.
That's correct.
Thank you. Please answer the question from Kyle Cohen as well. What are your 3 key priorities for the next 6 months? That's rather short term, Kyle.
Yeah, I think having regard to the fact that we've got our obvious priorities such as health and safety that will always remain top of mind. Kyle, I'm going to stretch your question and give you 4 priorities. The first one is resolving municipal debt. As Caleb has indicated, we are now sitting with municipal debt at 42.5 billion. It is unsustainable. Eskom can no longer borrow money at 9.85% interest and then keep on funding defaulting municipalities. We really need a structural solution to this challenge. We are engaged with National Treasury on this, and I'm hopeful that early in the new year we will continue our engagements and be able to find a solution to this really thorny problem that is starting to have a very negative impact on Eskom. Just to put it into context, municipal debt now exceeds 10% of Eskom's total debt. So it gives you an indication as to how significant this number is. The second one is that I'd like us to find a solution to Eskom's debt. Again, we need to engage in discussions with our shareholder and with National Treasury. I believe that the Minister of Finance is fully apprised of the challenge that Eskom debt presents, and that he has instructed his officials again to engage and make progress on finding a solution in this regard. The third priority is generation performance. I have had a number of frank and direct conversations with Jan Oberholzer and Philip Dukashi. I think we understand what needs to be done. We are going to step up our efforts to drive operations excellence in our plants, make sure that we've got the right skills in the right places, and that we focus on improving the performance of generation so that we minimize the incidence of load shedding, even while we continue to enable and facilitate the addition of new capacity to the grid. The fourth priority, and this is more of a future-focused one, is to enable the JET program to take off. The Minister referred to Komati as our flagship JET program, Just Energy Transition Program. But of course, this is a longer-term strategic initiative which we believe can have very beneficial impacts on South Africa's commitments to meet its carbon footprint reduction as per the Paris Agreement and its nationally determined contribution commitments. We have had a very good COP26 where 131 billion rand was pledged. There are other countries and other institutions also keen to support the just energy transition, and we look forward to enabling and accelerating as we proceed with implementing this very important and very significant intervention in the South African energy landscape. Thanks, Sekanati.
Thank you, Andre. Thanks, Caleb. Please give us the next set, Namaswazi.
Okay, we've got one from Antoinette Slavert at the report. Do you expect the proposed agreements regarding Eskom's land, as explained by Minister Kodan, to become a significant new income stream? Can you give us an idea of the scale of such an income stream, please? Her second question is, how significant is the cost of start-up fuel oil, and what has been the movement in recent periods? How large does the corruption feature in such movements? The next one is from Kyle Cowan at News 24. As a follow-up to Antoinette's question, the opening of the Eskom land for private investors may not be welcome in some quarters. What is the primary motivator for this initiative, and is this seen as an opportunity to alleviate supply strain? The last one is from Jan de Lange at Report. He wants to know any progress on the signing of the emergency power generation project. What will the net effect on Eskom's balance sheet be of the unbundling of the new transmission company? How will it affect the debt ratio?
Thank you, Swazi. Andre, please go ahead.
Right, thanks very much, Antoinette. No, I don't think that it will be a major new income stream, bearing in mind that this is largely agricultural land that we lease out typically to farmers for grazing. Some of the land is in fact despoiled, so it is really not suitable for agriculture. So the absolute value of the land is quite limited. What we envisage is not a disposal of land per se, but rather entering into long-term leases. What we do want to do is to run a competitive bidding process with prospective developers to gain access to the land. We have a methodology to do that in terms of an auction process to make sure that it is transparent and competitive, that we don't extend any favoritism to any particular developer. But I don't anticipate that this will be a major source of revenue going forward. It is more intended to ease the immediate bottleneck that exists in terms of grid capacity to allow new generation plant to be brought into operation at the earliest opportunity. I'm going to ask Philip again to deal with fuel oil and what the movement is on fuel oil, and make comments about any allegations of corruption. Please, Philip.
Thanks, Andre. Sorry, I missed part of the question, but just generally, in terms of fuel oil, we have picked up a lot of corruption, and part of the arrests that have taken place are linked to that at Tutuka. We have upped our security and we have upped our controls in terms of the amount of money now that we are spending on fuel oil. It has decreased. We are seeing an increase which is linked to unreliability of our plant, because then you need to have more starts and so on. But I think the controls have substantially improved. And just to give you an example, for instance, at Tutuka, we're making use of drone technology, and we are monitoring, and something that we did not do as detailed previously. We're monitoring each and every truck that comes in, and that has resulted in substantial savings for us. This is something that we have extended to all the power stations to make sure that our controls are in place and we can account for all the fuel that is delivered to the plant. On top of that, on the other side, we can obviously monitor how much fuel is consumed during light-ups. So that also gives us a very good comparison in terms of what we are receiving and what we are consuming. So that's a balance that, every time we then reconcile those two to make sure that they do talk to each other. I'm sorry, I hope I've dealt with the question. Thanks.
Thanks, Philip. Corruption, of course, is always a risk when you deal with large amounts of a tradable commodity. That also extends to diesel as well as to coal and fuel oil. And we are stepping up our surveillance of the supply chains on all three of those commodities at our power stations. I just recently signed off on a significant new intervention to step up our security and our surveillance in that regard. So I think we're going to get our arms around this. There are a number of syndicates operating in Mpumalanga who make a lot of money out of this, and we are going to stop them. Shall I deal with Carl's and Jan's questions as well?
You partly have answered Kyle's question. The real deal is, what is the primary motivator? And you spoke about alleviating supply. Can we deal with Jan's questions? Jan, the first part is Eskom has not signed any emergency power project yet. Am I correct, Andre?
Yep, that is correct. So the reason for not signing the emergency power generation projects at this point in time is that we still await the resolution of the maximum gas price determination methodology. This is outstanding. This needs to be resolved between NERSA and the IPP office. We have indicated to them that we require this information in order to understand what the impacts could be of the maximum gas price on the electricity that we are required to buy under this program. So I think that's the first important one. And then also, of course, the emergency power projects require EIAs and other regulatory approvals. These are important conditions precedent that we need to be satisfied on, as well as the resolution of currently pending litigation. Now, the challenge with the litigation is that all of the participants in the RMIPPP program were cited as co-respondents to the litigation. And what that means is that an award may potentially affect the legality of the entire program. And as such, we are in a very difficult position to sign even those programs that are not controversial. And we therefore need to understand how we can deal with it. Maybe there's an indemnity that we can be offered. But these are matters that we have presented to our board. Our board is fully engaged in the emergency power generation projects. They understand what the risks are, and they have given us instructions in accordance with their fiduciary duties as directors of the entity and we will implement those as directed by our board. Thank you.
Andre, thank you. Caleb, please deal with the effect of the unbundling of transmission on the debt ratios.
Yeah, thanks, Secretary, to Jan's question. I think first and foremost, the unbundling is still wholly owned subsidiaries. So obviously when we consolidate that, it'll still come to the overall group position. So maybe linked to an earlier question from Terence, until you address the balance sheet, as Andre has indicated as our second priority, that's not going to show any improvement in terms of the ratios at a group level. Thank you.
Thank you, Caleb. Bring us, please, the next set of questions.
We have questions from Thamson, Daily Maverick. What plans does Eskom have to provide public participation in the process to extend the lifespan of Koeberg Nuclear Power Station, considering efforts to extend the lifespan are already underway? SAFKI, which is the Southern African Faith Communities Environment Institute, and Koeberg Allied Alliance argue that the 20 billion earmarked for extending the life of the power station would be better spent on renewable energy options. Does Eskom consider this as a viable option? Question number 3, what impact will taking Unit 2 of Koeberg Power Station offline for the first part of the next year have on load shedding during this period? Questions from Edward, Red Intelligence. Eskom GCEO, Durator, said today the company has appointed a financial advisor on its debt plan. Can Eskom tell us who the advisor is? Next set of questions, Sabelo, Sunday Times. Philip said there's an intention to do more maintenance as a consequence of running the plants hard. How will this impact current forecasts of the year results? Is there an update on Eskom's discussions with Treasury regarding how cumbersome it is to procure equipment and service providers?
Thank you, Lerato. Public participation for the extension of the nuclear plant. We do have the Chief Nuclear Officer on the line as well, Ridwan Pakatin. He can help. Do you want to take it, Andre, or shall we give it to him?
No, Ridwan is far more qualified than I am to answer this.
Thank you. Ridwan, please. Shall we read the question again? We seem to have lost Ridwan. 2 minutes ago, he was on the line.
If Ridwan is not on the call, Jan is, in fact, if I'm correct, at Koeberg right now. Jan, can you please come in on this one?
Jan is not able to come in either.
All right, then I shall have to step into the breach.
Thank you.
Given my lack of nuclear engineering proficiency. We have to comply with all of the requirements set for us by legislation and by the National Nuclear Regulator. I have participated in some of the meetings with the National Nuclear Regulator, and I can give South Africans, and in particular people in the vicinity of Koeberg, the assurance that the National Nuclear Regulator takes its job extremely seriously and is truly a guardian of public interest when it comes to nuclear safety. So we will continue following the guidance of the regulator, and we will abide by all of the safety prescripts identified by the regulator, and obviously also any procedural requirements for public engagement. If you look at the cost of generating electricity at Koeberg, it is far and away our lowest cost generation option. If memory serves, the cost per kilowatt hour generated at Koeberg is in the order of about 42 cents. Which is extremely competitive. It's about half of the cost of coal-fired generation. So this is highly competitive. The plant is in good shape. It has recently been the subject of an extensive independent benchmarking exercise done by the World Association of Nuclear Operators, of which Eskom is a member. Following this benchmarking exercise, we were upgraded in terms of the assessment, so we have done better than we have done previously. So Ridvan and his colleagues have done a really exceptional job of operating this facility. And if you look at the cost of any alternative form of generation that will produce reliably and with dispatchable electricity, 1,800, close to 1,900 megawatts of electricity for 20 years for the cost of 20 billion rand, this is probably one of the most lucrative projects and most economic projects in Eskom. So from an economic perspective, an operational perspective, a system perspective, a grid perspective, as far as Eskom is concerned, life extension for Koeberg is a no-brainer, and it is something that we are proceeding with, of course, subject to compliance with safety and regulatory requirements. The fact that we have to take down Koeberg 2 for 155 days, and then following that Unit 1 for general outage and also the replacement of the steam generators, yes, that does deprive us of 928 megawatts per unit for the duration of that outage. Because Koeberg is so reliable, it does create an additional risk on the system, and that is a risk that is very well understood by Philip and the team in generation, and that is why we have to step up to the plate in terms of improving the reliability and availability of our coal-fired plant. The synchronization of Kusile 4, which we anticipate will take place in January of next year, will certainly help to mitigate that risk, as the output of that is just under 800 megawatts. So that will, once it ramps up to full capacity, will certainly help to offset the risk created by these outages. Can I ask Caleb to answer the question of the financial advisor?
Thanks. Yes, Eskom has appointed Lazard as our financial advisor. And in terms of our legal advisors, before that question comes up, domestically we've got ENS Africa, and internationally White & Case. Thank you.
Thank you, Caleb. Just after you've dealt with the question, Andre, Ridwan is online again, but please proceed with the Sunday Times question. Philip said there's an intention to do more maintenance as a consequence of running the plant hard. How will this impact the forecast for the year-end financial results? Is there an update on Eskom's discussion with Treasury on the cumbersome procurement process and service providers?
Philip, can you deal with the first one, and then I'll deal with the Treasury question?
So as I understand it, this is more a financial question. So the amount of money that we need in order to do this maintenance, this increased maintenance, that money has been set aside. We've had conversation with the CFO, so that money has been allocated. We know exactly how much we need to spend in terms of that maintenance. So now I would assume, and the CFO might comment on that, but I would assume that it is included in the projections that were shared earlier on. Thanks.
Philip, you are correct. It is included in that 9 billion loss projection. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Philip. That helps. Thanks, Caleb. We had a very good engagement with National Treasury about procurement processes. We have identified a number of bottlenecks and opportunities to streamline the process and to ensure that good governance can partner hand in hand with efficient and effective procurement in a way that allows us to ensure that we can get value for money for the Eskom rand, but also, very importantly, that we're able to execute the work that we are required to do quickly and effectively. We have had a long list of challenges. These issues were properly ventilated in a high-level meeting, and I think we are making some very good progress in addressing some of the frustrations that we've experienced in procurement. Hopefully, early in the new year, again, further engagements with National Treasury will help us to resolve these matters. Thank you.
Thank you, Andre. Please give us the last set of questions, colleagues.
The last question is from Duncan McLeod at Tech Central. He wants to know, why is the land being made available in Mpumalanga only? Why is the land being made available in Mpumalanga only, being made available on a lease basis? Would Eskom consider selling the land if a private investor was insistent on this as a condition of investing? If not, why not?
From time to time, we do consider divesting of non-core assets. You may be aware that Eskom has a very large property portfolio. We have recently sold 2 unused office buildings, one in Bromfontein, the other one in Kimberley. So we do optimize our property portfolio. So this is not a line in the sand that we're not prepared to engage on. The reason for the lease approach really is that we think that it's the most effective way of quickly reaching agreement rather than following a fairly cumbersome disposal process where we first have to offer any property that we sell to the Department of Human Settlements, and that could potentially slow down this process. The rationale really for this idea is that, as we have repeatedly said, there's a gap of about 4,000 to 6,000 megawatts in generation capacity that needs to be filled, and we believe that by following this approach we can address that generation gap and create enough headroom for Eskom to carry out the maintenance that is required without adding to the risk of load shedding. Thank you.
Andre, the last part to that question is why Mpumalanga only? And can you also add this question that has not been asked? How long would you expect any projects to then start delivering power once there is an award in terms of that process?
Right, so Mpumalanga, I think the question is not about Mpumalanga per se. That's just where we have a very well-developed grid with excess capacity. And that capacity, of course, is going to increase as we retire more and more power stations. So that's the reason why we are focused on Mpumalanga. Furthermore, Mpumalanga is very important from a just energy transition perspective. And we want to attract and entice investors to come and set up their plants in Mpumalanga so that we can demonstrate to participants in the coal value chain that the just energy transition is real, that it is viable, that it is not just greenwashing or anti-coal, but that it really does create a viable alternative future for people who have been active communities that have supported Eskom for so many years. We do believe that it is our corporate social responsibility to do exactly that. Siganati, the second part of your question was?
How long do you expect, or when do you expect the first power to start coming from any awards?
Right, that's a tough question to answer. We think that we can run an accelerated process to give access to the land. We think that should not take more than 3 to 4 months if we can start early in the new year with that process. Then, of course, the projects will need to obtain financing, they will need to order their equipment, they need to mobilize on site. If I can hazard a guess, it would be between 18 to 24 months for solar projects, slightly longer for wind projects.
Thank you. Thanks, Andre. Colleagues, thank you very much. The time is exactly 4:45. This is the end of the media briefing. As I have already said, we have here, by the way, my two other colleagues that have not had the benefit of answering any question for transmission and for distribution. At this point, though, Andre and Caleb have to attend to the investor call, which will last exactly an hour. We have already agreed to interviews that have been requested, and those will proceed as indicated. Thank you for your attention, and please do keep safe and travel safely. Have a good afternoon.